listen.
Hello, everyone. This is Data-Driven Chat, and today I'm incredibly excited to have Jen Stirrup with us. Jen is Data Whisperer and CEO of Data Relish. Hi, Jen. It's great to see you.
Hello there. Thank you for having me along. I'm really pleased. And it's wonderful to meet you at last. I have been seeing you a lot on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I'm glad we've scheduled this podcast because it gives me the chance to finally meet you and chat with you.
It's great to have you with us today. Thank you, Jen. And yeah, I also have to say that Jen is on many different essential to watch AI lists. And I think that's how we initially met, because eventually I got on the same list with Jen, but I cannot even compete even close to, with your the number of the number of awards you've got and the number of mentions you have in different must-watch lists in AI and data science is absolutely incredible. So thank you for finding the time to talk to me today.
It's my pleasure. I mean, the thing with these lists is it gives me the chance to meet other cool people. So that's why I like the idea of the lists, because it means I get to connect with people like yourself, because otherwise it's a bit harder to connect if you're not in social media, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. There is just so much information and so many things about data science and AI these days. It's hard to filter information, and the lists help with that. I do agree. So to kick off our today's discussion. So you work in generating business intelligence and helping businesses understand data better and how to use data science and AI to achieve better outcomes. So how did you become interested in this? And can you tell us a little bit more about your personal journey? How did you start your business? How did you decide to do this?
I just found that every organization had data, and it was something I was really personally interested in. I have always been a bit of a data detective. And when you work in organizations and you tell them something about their own company that they did not know before, suddenly I became really useful wherever I worked. Because I think sometimes organizations find data difficult to contend with. And sometimes it does take a brave person in an organization to say, well, let's look and see what the data says. And maybe I've always been a bit of a canary in a cage. And in the olden days, the miners would put a canary down the mine. And if the canary died, then they knew it was not okay to go down. There was not enough oxygen. Mm-hmm. And it's quite a cruel thing, really. But sometimes I feel in my career, I've been a canary in a cage, where organizations have felt it's risky to look at their data. So I became the canary. You know, if I survived, it would be okay. And if I didn't, in some ways, as a consultant, you're expendable. So I think my motivation for doing it was I felt I could make a really strong impact on people in businesses with their data. And I tend to measure myself by impact rather than titles.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great. I think these days a lot of people just talk about it rather than think about impact. So it's great. I know that you are one of few people who actually do it, which is awesome. So I think most of people who will listen to podcast will know your work, but just in case there is someone who doesn't, if I asked you to pick one most important thing, something that you are particularly proud of in your whole career, what would it be?
I think it would be setting up in business myself. Now, I did that for a few reasons. Early in my career, I was a single mother. I'm still a single mother. And I found that it was a good way to organise and juggle my family life with a professional life. And I felt that combining a career with my family background was a tough thing to do. And I think it's probably the most important thing I've achieved. I think it's given me a lot of fulfillment. It also meant I could be there for my son when I wanted to be. For example, school plays and picking him up from school, that kind of thing. It does mean that I've had to work extremely hard. So that's lots of late nights, early mornings, and disappearing weekends. But that's probably the thing that has been the most important thing to me.
I'm gonna ask you more questions about COVID later, but I was just wondering, as you were talking about it, do you think this journey prepared you better for the current situation? Since you already had to kind of understand how to balance your parenting life with work and everything else. Do you feel that you were better prepared for when we went kind of working from home in this working from home mode?
I think that's true. And for me personally, very little changed because I don't go out and socialise very much. I tend to be very focused on my work and my family. So these two things are the most important thing to me. I think because I spend so much time at home, nothing really changed. I think it did become harder in some ways because businesses were less likely to pay on time. Mm-hmm. And there were also problems in getting projects signed off. So I found that more complex. On the plus side, I have been doing more training courses because companies seem to understand that this is a really good time to train their employees. Mm-hmm. So because of that, I think it's almost swings and roundabouts. I've been trying to share some information on how I've been juggling everything. But I think the lockdown has meant that we can all have a reset. We have had to take a lot out of our lives, and it means we can put the good stuff back in again.
Mm. Yeah. So thank you for sharing this. This is indeed very, very important. I think to find the balance, and a lot of people were struggling because they had 9-to-5 jobs. So it's great to have your example, to understand how it could all be done. So as you can see, guys, it can all be done. You can do it.
Lots of hard work.
Yeah,
lots of hard work, but it can be done.
Yeah, it is hard work, but it can be done. You can do it. So can you tell us a little bit about what you are currently working on and what makes you excited, what keeps you awake at night?
So I'm currently working on a piece of data architecture and strategy. It's not a very technical piece. The customer needs some direction, mm-hmm. and I'm helping them to do that. They are in a situation in which a lot of organizations are in. There's a mix of early adopters in the organization who are very keen to go down the path of data science and AI. Mm-hmm. And then you get the laggards who are not quite so keen to do anything with data, and they quite like their lives and their jobs the way that they are. But this coronavirus situation means that we all have to rethink how we do things. And actually, it's a good time for companies to rethink their data as well. So what keeps me up at night really is data security, because I have to think about that as part of any data project. And I very rarely lose sleep about anything at night. As soon as my head hits the pillow, that's it. I deserve that sleep. It's my only break. But I do find security wakes me up. That keeps me up because I worry that organizations either do nothing because they don't know how to start. Mm-hmm. So they become almost paralyzed by doing any data project. And it usually starts with, well, we don't know about security or GDPR. Mm-hmm. And then you get the other organizations who don't seem to think about it as much because they feel they've become GDPR compliant and they equate that with security. and they're two quite different things.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I also find a lot of times that companies mix compliance with security or safety, and yeah, indeed, that is a huge problem. A lot of people who listen to this podcast are aspiring data scientists or aspiring business analysts, and some of them do want to get into business intelligence. So can you give some advice to people who are trying to get into business intelligence and perhaps consulting, where to start? Because, I know that a lot of my students often ask me, I want to be a consultant, so what do I do? What do I need to learn? How do I start?
Yes, I think a great way to start is work on soft skills. That's important for any technology, really. And people forget that. I meet wonderful technologists who can't explain what they're doing and why, and they don't always understand the why or the purpose of what they're doing in the first place. And that means it becomes quite easy to veer off course and become almost too data driven, where they are excited by something they've seen in the data, which may not be that relevant. So I think to get started, I did a lot of technology community work and lots of volunteering. So I do work with organisations like DataKind, for example, where you can meet other people, you have to explain the results. And I'd give people one idea, which is to start presenting. So whether it's a podcast or a webinar or a YouTube channel, it doesn't mean you get millions of people overnight. But it does give potential employers a sense of what you care about and a sense of your attitudes and your enthusiasm. It gives them a shop window to understand more about you. And it also gives you the edge, I think. And honestly, I would not suggest that people worry too much about equipment. When I do podcasts and webinars, my web camera is less than £100. So you don't need to worry about buying lots of technology. Just get started and you will get better as you go on. Nobody is born knowing this, and the only way to do it is to practice. It doesn't have to be for an hour. Even just do little bite-sized slots, even just 5-minute bites now and again. Build up to doing it once a week, and it really will help sell yourself.
Mm-hmm. I thank you for saying that, because I recently attended a seminar on how to do kind of video presenting for YouTube, and where in these seminars the instructor suggested that you need to make sure that it's high quality. And I was thinking, and this is what I kind of said during this conversation, was that you will never start if you think that you need the best equipment, because if you think about it, I need so many things to record and probably very good camera. No, you don't. When I started doing this podcast, I just used Zoom recording, so cloud recording, so I recorded to the cloud. Now I have something that records, and it's it's a little bit better, but yeah, you don't really need that. You can achieve quite a lot with very little. So yeah, it's an awesome advice. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
So you work a lot with businesses, and in your opinion, why is understanding data particularly important for businesses now? How did it change in the last few years? So because you've been watching it for for a number of years now, and do you think that we already see the data potential realize in business, or we have yet to see what data can do in the future?
Yeah, I think there's still to see what data can do. Data, as you know, is at the foot of every business. It involves every process, and it also helps businesses to predict what they'd like to do next. I think the reason data has become so important now is because I think people finally feel they've got access more to the data that they need. Now, specifically with the coronavirus situation, my prediction is that there will be more small to medium businesses being acquired by larger organisations, and there will be a sense of the fittest will survive. Now, when there's a merger or acquisition, there often can be merging of data at that point. Because usually, and this is my experience, you find that one company with bad data acquires another company with bad data. So the combination of two data sources that are really bad means organizations can get themselves into a mess. So I think we're going to see more in the next year or so about how do we clean data, can we use AI for that, and how does that impact businesses if they can't work with data very well. I was speaking to one of my customers who said, I'm thinking about potentially acquiring another business. I'm thinking about it, but I'm not sure. And he said the blocker for him was the quality of the data in the acquiree organisation. He said he's spoken to them and he got a sense that the data wasn't good. And for him, that was the blocker. It was not the people, it was not the technology. They had a lot of very good things going for them. He said it's the data. I worry about that. And it's interesting to me that data is becoming such a big concern in merger and acquisitions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed, and even we see it, I think, in large organizations with a large kind of geographical coverage, that data is fragmented, right, from different pieces of the same. For example, bank, it's very difficult to reconcile, and it's a huge job. I also want to ask you some questions about diversity and inclusion. And the first question that I have for you on that topic is about you being a female CEO in this high-tech field. So in your opinion, why do we have a lack of women in CEO positions? Like, even if we look at let's just look at the top kind of Fortune 500 companies. We have, I think, 37 women in total now there, so which is still not a huge number. But if we, start looking in terms of racial diversity within that group, it's even worse. So, so in your opinion, like, what are the main reasons? Is that women just do not self-select into these roles, or there are other historical, maybe evolutionary even reasons for that?
I think there's a lot there to unpack, really. I think that in my experience, I've had to be 10 times as good to get to the same place. And one thing that drew me to data was I could be correct with the data and people would have to acknowledge me then. And the Greek myth, Cassandra. So Cassandra was destined to tell the truth, but have nobody believe her. And I felt that when I was younger in my career, that I was a Cassandra. I couldn't get people to listen or to understand, and I felt I had insights and things to add, but I couldn't get my voice heard. And I think the way that I got my voice heard was by owning the data, understanding it. And then because I owned and understood the data, I became more visible in organizations that I was working in. It also made me harder to ignore and also much more useful. So I think that one aspect is that for some people, the answer is no before you've opened your mouth. And I think there's also some issues which are quite social. So in terms of letting people speak and finish their sentences, I find that has always been a challenge for me. I'm softly spoken, and I think people find it easy to talk over me. So I think some of it is the fact that you need to be seen first and heard before you can get on the ladder. And if there's one action I would like everyone to take away that's listening, is if you notice that someone is not being heard, is you can be the person that helps their voice to carry, and that will make you a leader in your own environment, because leaders are not always about job titles or awards.
Mm-hmm.
Be the person that you would like someone else to be for you.
Mm-hmm. So in your, as you just articulated, this softly spoken manner, you've just made a big splash in social media with your exit from Microsoft Most Valuable Professional. Can I say program? I'm sorry. Program. So hopefully I got it right. Can you tell us about this experience? So you have done it in a very public manner. So first of all, I guess we need to explain to people what is Microsoft Most Valuable Professional Program, because some people might not know what Most Valuable Professionals do. And then can you tell us about this experience and why you decided to leave the program, because you were there for over 10 years, as far as I understand. So, and also I think you set an example for many women who are, perhaps thinking, should I speak up in these types of situations when, I'm treated unfairly? Just tell us about it.
Yeah, so the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional Program is primarily a marketing exercise for Microsoft. So they award people, about 3,000 people across the world, with this MVP award. And basically they bill it as you have exceptional community technical leadership. So that's the program, and I was in it just short of 10 years. Mm-hmm. I left the program, and the reasons for that was I had been complaining about a number of issues for a period of time. Some of those were related to diversity and inclusion. Some of those were related to the behaviour of other MVPs, mm-hmm. and some of that was directed towards me, and some of it was things that I saw. So 6 months before my departure, I was having serious concerns about remaining in the programme, and I just felt things were getting worse, and I kept complaining and being dismissed. Mm-hmm. So I decided in the end that after a particular incident, it was not only that incident, there were others, that it was time for me to go. I felt I was validating the programme by being in it. And the best way to give myself a safe space was to leave. I don't believe the programme itself will improve in the future, because improvement is optional rather than compulsory. So there's no governance wrapped around it. The issue there is that they are judge, jury, and executioner. Okay. And if you complain about something, then it's up to them whether they do something. There's no appeal process, and there's no other place to take your complaint in Microsoft. You may find that with diversity issues and women in technology specifically, it tends to be death of 1,000 lashes rather than one incident that wears you down. And I think when I was complaining about things, it was almost like they were saying, well, that's not 1,000 lashes, that's just 999 lashes. So, and that was up to them to decide. And I thought, well, I'm not happy being part of a programme which makes decisions without scrutiny, and where they're judge, jury, and executioner. And while they continue to measure themselves, they will continue to measure themselves in a way that I see Microsoft doing quite a lot, which is everything is a success because they say so. That means they get to decide. Mm-hmm. And that their position on many points was quite different from mine. We have to separate out the marketing from the reality, and it's very easy to get sucked into diversity and inclusion as a marketing piece, because people like to see pictures of happy women and that kind of thing. I also think for Microsoft more widely, I think the fact that they continue to support a programme which has so little governance and not really accountable part of Microsoft tells me that the primary purpose is not really that pastoral care that you expect when you think of a big organisation. It's more about their emphasis is getting click-throughs and marketing. They say they're very proud of their diversity and inclusion efforts, but that's to be expected because they set their own standards. But to summarise, I found it quite toxic, and I'm glad I'm not wasting my time on it anymore. I can spend time doing things that are really about data science for good and not generating click-throughs for a company which really didn't fundamentally care about me or care about the same things in the same way that I did.
Well, you know, what really was striking for me when I read your post, like your exit post, was that you said, like, I didn't feel safe. You know,
Yes.
I didn't feel safe. And so I just think that it's, when I talk to quite a lot of women on this podcast included, and that's kind of what I think that's the general theme in many, you know, conversations that I have. But people are just not, particularly women are not very outspoken about this. So they say, well, they would kind of admit that it's not very safe environment, but they never say it like that. So I just want to say that I really admire you for kind of channeling this message and saying that, you know, safety, it should be safe. And then, I guess another question that I wanted to ask you, kind of a follow up on when you were talking about it. So when you mentioned that there were kind of series of events and many different components. So it's kind of it kind of was brewing for a while, this problem. Do you feel that, like, for example, in decision science research and behavioral research, we normally observe, you can think about people leaving places as kind of like a divorce situation. And when we look at divorce, it's normally just one event, and then eventually kind of things, you know, pile up. So for you, like, when you were describing it, it felt like there was an initial event and then it piled up. Or do you feel that it was kind of really many different things that contributed, and eventually one was, you know, this is one too many? So I just want to ask you, was it one thing that kind of blew out of proportion, or was it like really, multiple things?
I think it was lots of 999 lashes on various occasions that just mounted up. I think as well, when I look back, my voice wasn't heard, and I felt my complaints and those of others as well were not being taken seriously. That led me to believe that I would not be safe. And if something happened, that the MVP program wouldn't do anything. And I think I asked myself, why do I want to be in a position like that, where I'm being diminished and dismissed when I'm raising concerns? So I think that all of those things together made me feel less safe. And I was in the program for a long time. And I think what happened was at first things seemed okay. And I think that was because people made an effort. But then after a while, I think people start to show their true colours. And I complained more, and I was just dismissed more. So I ended up in this cycle where my relationship with some Microsoft staff was not good because I was complaining so much, and their response was to diminish and dismiss me rather than and comment on the way that I said things, rather than look at what I said with any validity. And I think that's a very easy way to diminish somebody. And in my last email, when I resigned from the program, I did say, I am no longer letting you do this to me. Because I think that when you are in those situations, you do get very ground down. You get very gaslit because you think the problem is you, especially if you are having repeated attempts to get your voice heard. And it's almost like a playbook of responses that comes back at you to diminish you, make you feel small for complaining. And I think organisations, especially big ones like Microsoft, need to think very carefully about the messages they send. It's not cynical marketing. And these messages can be implicit or explicit, but we're past the window dressing stage of diversity and inclusion now. And I think that's where the problems have started to hit. When I joined the programme, it was a lot of window dressing. And now that more women are in it, we're past window dressing. But I think the programme's still in the window dressing stage. We really are thinking about recruitment rather than retention and making people feel safe when they're there. And they're also not considering items like accountability, consequences. And I think there's plenty of things they could do to resolve that, but I don't see that happening. When I resigned from the programme, I lost a lot of friends overnight. I lost about 200 LinkedIn connections overnight, and I lost a lot of Twitter followers overnight from Microsoft employees. And I thought, well, if you are really concerned about the voices, then you have to listen to the voices that make you uncomfortable, as well as the ones that make you comfortable, because it's discomfort is where we see growth and change. And it's not until that happens that we will see changes. It needs to be a consistent effort, and it needs to be continual, not flash in the pan because this has happened, but a consistent effort that is not based on a marketing exercise.
Indeed, and yeah, I mean, you kind of precluded my next question about what I saw on LinkedIn and Twitter were mostly positive, kind of supportive comments. But you then mentioned in your posts that there were people who were quite nasty as a result of your decision. So yeah, I mean, you just kind of nicely clarified that there were, people who unfollowed you and probably made some private comments. But yeah, I mean, I can just say that everybody I know really supported you and said, "Well, that was very brave." And I hope that you also feel support, not only not only the negativity of this decision. So that's my hope.
I think I lost a lot of people in my life for whom I was a convenience. And convenience is not friendship. I think I'm hoping that by leaving and revealing who I really am and what I care about means that I get nicer people in my life, people like yourself who reached out. So I think that is really important. And what you did for me when you reached out and then asked me to come on, I felt such a sense of validation, because I thought it's important when you lose a lot of people to try and fill your life with people that are more in tune with what you're thinking. So thank you for what you did for me. I know it may not seem like much to you, but for me it was a big thing. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Jen. Yeah, so I'm hoping that I'm sure that this will be just a chapter, and then you can just move on to better things and. The MVP program is not everything, and indeed you need to direct your talent to places where you feel you can flourish rather than fight against circumstances. So we talked about problems so far, but in terms of what can be done, so how can we make situation better? And I've talked to quite a few women on this podcast, and this is kind of the traditional question that I ask. Do you think there is something we can do to increase diversity and inclusion, and what would be your priority if you were in charge and you could you could change minds and change culture? So what can be done in your opinion?
I think organisations, when they set up partnerships with other companies, should require a standard of ethics and diversity and inclusion. That can be measured by things like unconscious bias training and diversity and inclusion training. So, and it has to be ongoing. And I think this is something that I've mentioned to other organisations and Microsoft as well, actually. They never considered the suggestion, I think. But one thing I would say is that it has to be continuous. It can't be just 1 hour a year online training, which it is for some companies. It has to be consistent, and it has to be something that's fairly rounded and well thought out. I think that we don't always consider things through different lenses. And I'm still learning about unconscious bias. I'm still learning as well. We're all still learning. It's things like one conference I attended always had special events on a Friday, which is fine unless you are Jewish or unless you have to attend Friday prayers at the mosque, for example, if you're Muslim. And by having events on a Friday like that, they were excluding people from religious backgrounds who have deeply felt convictions and act in accordance with that. So I think when we even organise conferences, we need to make space for people. Something I did for one of my events in Edinburgh was I arranged a prayer space, and I made sure that the conference breaks were in tune with the call to prayer for Muslims, to make sure that they could go and pray at those times. And I think that was me trying to make sure everyone felt included. And there's little things you can do. For example, if you are vegetarian, you may not want to have meat on the same table as vegetarian meals. So I spoke to one Hindi gentleman who said to me he did not like meat next to vegetarian meals. I'm vegetarian, so I understood that. And when I understood that for him that was religious motivation, at least I could be sure for every conference that I was running or part of, that we could be very confident that we tried to follow as many of the regulations and concerns around food. When I ran the Business Analytics Conference in San Jose in California, I made sure that we had a safe room right behind the main stage. And the idea was that if you were a victim of harassment in any way, you could make yourself available to go back to the main stage, and the room, the safe room, was right behind the stage. The reason I put it there was to make sure that it was accessible as possible. Because when something like that happens, people can become very disoriented, particularly in an unfamiliar environment. So by making sure that we had that right at the main stage, really made sure that everybody attending knew how important that was, because it was right next to the main stage where the keynotes were, with a big red sign outside it. And I also made sure that we called it the bat phone. I had a phone set up, actually went to 4 different phones, and we had 4 people carrying a phone each, so that if there was any harassment, any code of conduct violations, that someone could call that number and we were sure we'd have someone there straight away. Mm-hmm. So there's all sorts of things. Now, I know they sound quite negative, but I did try and set up a diversity charter. You know, when you see a disabled driver, they often have a blue badge on their dashboard. Mm-hmm. I wanted to build a diversity charter so that user groups and conferences, we could display a badge or a series of badges to show that they were specifically catering for people from different groups. So one might be an image to show like a prayer space, to show that there was a prayer space for people who wanted to do that. There was a disabled badge as well, so that you could show to someone in that situation that they were facilities for them. And the idea is about trying to make people feel as welcome as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I like your approach. It's kind of seems to be like this soft revolution, slowly but surely, with kind of step-by-step strategy, you would change things. Yeah, so that's awesome. So I want to now kind of turn the conversation from diversity and inclusion towards skills and kind of the future of AI. So some of my students and some of the people who are listening to this podcast are executives, and they normally kind of own the questions around data or AI in their companies, but they do not necessarily possess the technical skills. And the very popular question that I get from them is, do I need to learn technical skills? So do I need to know how to code? Do I need to know much about, programming packages or languages? So you've already talked about soft skills at the beginning of our conversation. So in your opinion, is it important to have technical skills if you are a CEO or C-level executive? And, how would you go about kind of getting these skills if you wanted them or if you needed them?
I think the best skill a CEO or a C-level executive can have is to ask the right questions. And you don't always need to be able to code in order to do that. Mm-hmm. I believe the most important question that they should ask is, what harm might this do? Normally, when we decide on a business project, we start to ask things like, well, how much money will this save us?
Yeah, that's right.
No, what will this cost us? And it's a very financial conversation to have. But I think when we get into the area of data and AI, we obviously think about those concerns. But we need to start with the very first question, what harm might this do? I'll give you an example. One organisation I heard of, an airline, actually built algorithms to identify who was most likely to pay to sit together on a flight. Mm-hmm. Now, if you are with your young family, then you want to sit together. So naturally, you pay to sit together. Mm-hmm. If you are on a plane with me and my son, believe me, you want my son to sit with me because he will be pestering the whole way for sweets and for Wi-Fi access and all that stuff. So I think that when that particular algorithm, which I think was used by Ryanair in the UK, nobody seemed to stop and ask themselves, what harm might this do? So that idea went from being an idea to being designed, developed, tested, implemented, sent to production, and maintained. But all along that way, nobody's put up their hand. Maybe they did not feel that they could. So a whistleblower is a great role to have. And I think the CEO needs to put in place a sort of whistleblower process where somebody can have an emergency break glass option if they feel the company is doing something that might introduce risk somewhere. Now, that risk could be reputational, it could be financial, it could be ethical, physical, or legal, for example. There's plenty of ways to look at risk, but to include these considerations as well as cost, particularly with data and AI. Because every time I see a Ryanair poster, I remember that algorithm. So it's reputational as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think, another important thing to consider is that sometimes the companies do not even realize that something could be harmful, right? Because when you were talking about it, I was just thinking about Facebook. When Facebook was set up, no one had any idea that might become a potential threat to democracy that we've seen recently, right? How it altered some votes and all that kind of stuff with different types of technology that was behind it from Cambridge Analytica and other companies. Mm-hmm. So I guess another thing is to, do you think that there is enough expertise to anticipate these types of risks that you kind of, when you are building a tech, you do not always realize, especially, companies that, are not very kind of ethics savvy, or they do not probably necessarily have the skills, right, for that. So do you think that it's possible that they, or you think, I'm just trying to kind of formulate your point here. Do you think that it's basically, if they just ask the question, then they will eventually get into this mindset that they will find the risk there.
I think it's actually a real key area for research, actually. I'm doing my MBA at the moment, in between everything else. And it was something I'm particularly interested in. I've been reading about ethical frameworks recently. I think there are ethical toolkits we can start to think about when using data science. And I think that these are in their infancy. I think that Google and IBM have been trying to put out their own ethical frameworks as a starting place, and those open source, so people can go and look at them and amend them and change them and update them. But I think it's interesting to notice who's putting out ethical toolkits and who isn't, who's just consuming them. It tells me who the leaders are in these areas. So I think that the expertise is not there at the moment, and there's always unintended consequences that we can't always see. But I think we minimise the risk by asking the questions. And I think, to come back to diversity and inclusion, that's why it's so important. Because if I had been in that team as a mother, I would have said in the idea situation, actually splitting up families on a plane is a really bad idea. And I think having people from different backgrounds helps you to minimise the risk and consider the ethics. And you can always learn from your colleagues and your classmates. People will come up with something that surprises you.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Currently we're in quite a strange situation, so we cannot obviously avoid the topic of COVID. So do you think that data science and artificial intelligence can help solve the current crisis and the aftermath of COVID? And we already heard many numbers about potential deficits for next year and all sorts of issues, and companies going out of business, all sorts of things are happening. So do you think data science can contribute to the solution, or it also creates more mess in a sense in this situation?
It feels like data science and AI are on trial in some ways. Until now, I think data science only became part of everyday life if it was to do with sports or to do with voting. And we've gone from people pulling up charts when we talk about sports to suddenly data science being part of COVID. We both know that data science and AI have been around for a long time, but I think for many people reading newspapers, intelligent laymen, suddenly data is everywhere. I think what the current crisis shows how bad we can be with data sometimes. If you take, for example, the UK reporting on the coronavirus as an example, that is something somebody should write a book on, just that. I'm not sure it'd be a bestseller, but it's basically a recipe on how not to do things. For example, they just relied on the data scientists to produce the first models, and they didn't seem to include the epidemiologists. And the epidemiologist said, you don't understand the exponential nature of an infection. And that was missing from the early models. And at that point, we had Boris Johnson singing happy birthday twice as he washed his hands, because the models were generated by data scientists who didn't understand the subject matter. So I think it can help solve the crisis, but it's not the only tool. We have to respect our content matter, subject matter experts. And I think it was a shame that they were missed out. I do think that data science itself is becoming a second career for many people. It's something that I see people coming at it later in life because they started off their career in healthcare or in astrophysics, as one of my friends did, and now moving into data science. And I think data science will become more helpful when it starts almost to disappear into these other disciplines, where it always was anyway, but becoming more highlighted. So I see the impact of data science being more pronounced in allowing citizens to hold democracies to account when it comes to things like the data. So coming back to the UK again, we saw that the numbers at first did not include deaths in care homes. And we also saw that a dip at the weekends was followed by a surge on a Tuesday when they started to include care homes. We also see that the government in Westminster releases data which is set to different time periods than the government in Scotland. So we start to see all these differences. So I think the biggest impact would be made really by data engineering, where people have to think carefully about how the data lines up.
Mm-hmm. So I now want to kind of zoom out a little bit to the whole field of business intelligence or business analytics. So what challenges do you feel business intelligence is facing today? So is there anything different about the current situation, or is it kind of the same old problem, but maybe magnified or highlighted by COVID?
I think the biggest challenge is expectations over data. Mm-hmm. We're very much in that hype cycle, which doesn't seem to be ending. I know some organizations say the AI will never have another winter. I actually disagree. I think that it may not have another winter, but things might get a little chilly because companies don't really understand how it works, don't know how to apply it, and don't know how to put it to production. So I think the biggest challenge will be expectations, meeting those expectations, and then how do we move forward when people don't get what they want? I think we're very spoiled by Google because we type in a few words into Google and we get 26 billion results back in a few seconds. And companies ask, well, why can't I do the same with my own data? Because there's much less of it. But that doesn't mean that Google is giving you 26 billion perfect results. It's just giving you results. And I think the key challenge will be data engineering, but also data translation, how to make the right data meaningful without losing accuracy and without losing the truth.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of data science and AI, what do you think will happen in the next 5 years? What topics would be hot? What is the future?
I think it's going to be data explainability, AI explainability. I think that will be huge. Mm-hmm. And also I think ethics will become more prevalently discussed as well. I think companies don't always recognize the harm that they might do. So with GDPR, for example, everyone's waiting for the first high-profile case that GDPR happens to an organization who then gets fined a lot of money. And I think there's a much more subtle threat happening to companies that are using AI and not using the data properly. Mm-hmm. So for me, I think the future is about explainability and data translation, making that data meaningful to the CEOs who are asking the right questions.
So we're almost at the end of the interview, and this is a question that all my guests complain about. The question is, and the question goes like this. If I asked you to recommend one book and one film, what would your recommendations be? And they don't have to be about data science. It's just something that you like, something that you come back to. But yeah, the restriction is that you only have to pick one of each.
Yeah, I think in terms of films, one of my favorite films is Three Colors Blue.
Oh, wow.
The Krzysztof Kieslowski. You know this film? I love it.
Yes, it's absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
It is amazing, isn't it? I love that film. Her acting is incredible. Mm-hmm. And when you think about how much time the camera just stares at her, she has to act all of that time. And I used to live in France. I used to live in Paris, and I was lucky enough to see it when it was there. And I came out of the cinema, and it was almost like I couldn't breathe. I just felt I'd been part of a piece of art. And I think that theme of personal liberty is important. You know, that actually life does continue, but we have to be mindful of our impact on other people. And that's what I took away from it.
Awesome. How about the book?
So I'm a big reader. I think that I struggled with this one, as you might expect.
Yeah.
So I'm reading a book at the minute, or I've been reading it on and off for years now actually. It's a book called Wild Scriptures. I've forgotten the name of the author. It's like a compilation of what the main religious texts say about specific phenomenon like love, war, and these kind of things, and kindness to one another. And it's interesting when you look at the texts, how similar they are, actually, and how they put forward a good moral code for us to live by. Obviously, the religions themselves are very different, but some themes are very common, and surprisingly so. And I would not say I understand it all. It's something I'm struggling to learn, but I'm trying to read that to educate myself better and to give myself a bigger vision, because I think we all need that sometimes, and also to help me understand other people better. To say at least I have tried to read parts of the Quran, for example, and have it explained to me. And it's something I will always try and read. I think it's important that we do that.
Awesome. Jen, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your insight and ideas and your experience. So this is really valuable, and I think that it will be a really important podcast for many people to listen to. And I think that it will be fantastic to have you maybe back with us sometime in the future. So thank you so much, and good luck with everything that you're doing. I'm a big fan, so I'm definitely going to be on the lookout for the great things that you're going to produce in the future. And thanks again.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for all your encouragement. It means a lot. And I'd love to meet you when all this is over. So hopefully we can go for a coffee. I'll come into London and treat you to a coffee. And it would just be great to hang out, really. So thank you for having me here.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.